Welcome to Picard, Season 1, Crammed. With the final Season 3 soon coming out, let's take a look back to where the series began. Set long after the utopian end of Star Trek TNG, we join a much older Jean-Luc, 14 years deep into his retirement, for a brand new show. Let's go! The titles imply Borg wreckage and themes of artificial humanoid engineering coalescing into Daddy himself. And we open on a cosmic dream sequence of Jean-Luc playing cards with Data on board the Enterprise D, with a conversation about folding in life or still choosing to call. Well, Picard is still all in. But the dream sequence becomes a Queen sequence relating to devastation on Mars. However, the waking retirement life is back on the French vineyards of Chateau Picard. It's a peaceful living with the help of his Romulan housekeepers, who make sure he looks dignified when required, because today he's being interviewed on the telly for the commemoration of the explosion of the Romulan sun, where Picard championed humanitarian aid and a Starfleet Armada program to help relocate their former enemy. But even in the far future, scumbag journalists still try to pull a Krishnan Guru Murphy to get under his skin by steering the conversation back to Starfleet's shameful disengagement of the rescue efforts following a synthetic attack on the shipyards of Mars that Picard considered an unacceptable act of turning their back on those in need. Meanwhile, over in New Boston, Daj, a bright young AI quantum consciousness engineer, celebrates her acceptance into the Daystrom Institute. But the scene is spoiled when a Black Ops hit team teleport in to kidnap the girl, instead managing to trigger some deep-rooted response that causes her to take out the entire unit. And in her scared and confused state, momentarily seeing a vision of Picard. And after catching that interview, she goes to visit him in hopes of getting some answers, scared of her own deadly reactions. She's a stranger to him, but Jean-Luc does his best to console her with a little treatment and a cup of tea, taking note of her unusual necklace design. There's something deep inside that makes her trust and know him, and she passes the dog test, so she gets to crash for the night, only to run away first thing in the morning. But his dreams of Data continue, who died by the way at the end of Nemesis, including a painting the android worked on that seems to require his attention. A painting, it turns out, that exists within Starfleet's quantum archive. So he pops over to San Francisco to visit his private collection, discovering that the painting matches Daj's appearance. A painting that Data had entitled Daughter. Although Daj's fears are real, her memories and impulses might be something a little more artificial, even including her conversations with her mother that tell her to go back. So, letting these impulses drive her, she unleashes a wave of hacking to locate Picard once more, who suspects that she's not just a schizophrenic allaying her concerns, but that she's an android. Not like the bad ones from that Mars incident, but a possible daughter of Data. Let's hope she lives a little longer than his last one. Her precious life memories may be fake, but Picard keeps things judgment-free and supportive, until her internal alarm kicks off at the presence of more Black Ops hit teams that beam in to kill her, turning out to be Romulan, and Jean-Luc watches on as Daj uses her superior build to dismantle and destroy them, right up until one of them spits a suicide corrosive on her that also causes one of the disruptors to blow, killing Daj and blasting the 80-year-old man all the way back to France. He's magically okay, however, but there's no record of another person, just that the police said he was caught up in an accident. Someone is covering things up, personally offending his sense of justice, so he stops nursing his offended dignity and gets back to living, visiting the Daystrom Institute and Dr. Agnes Girardi to ask about the creation of synthetic life from flesh and blood. Well, sentient synthetics that are both human outside and in were almost within reach, but the lab got mostly shut down due to the Federation's ban on android creation. She keeps a dismantled B4 in a tray and laments the departure of her former colleague Dr. Maddox, another genius of synthetic design. Well, Picard has recently shared a cup of tea with the girl that shouldn't exist, implying that a part of Data's positronic network is still out there, as it would be needed as a base to build such perfect new synths. And that's synths plural, because as confirmed by Daj's necklace symbol, the positronic process always involved creating synthetics in pairs, meaning she has a twin. A twin, in fact, called Soji, that's also unaware of her true nature and working for a Romulan reclamation project inside the dormant shell of a Borg cube. So what the hell happened on Mars? Well, despite Picard's previous arguments for android rights, the Federation went ahead anyway with synthetic slave labor, stored away as second-class citizens and treated like shit. But one day they became compromised, lowering the orbital defense system on Mars, killing all the humans, and laying waste to the shipyards. guards. Back home, Picard and his Romulan housekeepers investigate what might have been evidence tampering by the Tal Shiar, but this level of technical skill indicates an organization far deeper and older than the usual Romulan secret police, known as the Zhat Vash, who is said to act above all treaties and borders. So Laris goes with Picard to check out Daj's room and proves she's got a lot more experience than just tidying up the place when she uses some forbidden technology to confirm they are standing in a cleaned up crime scene, but scrubbed to such a degree that it matches the Zhat Vash MO, who are incidentally believed to be at the root of the cultural hatred that Romulans generally hold toward artificial life. And after some hacking technobabble, she discovers Daj had been receiving calls from her sister somewhere far from off-world. Meanwhile, Soji and her secret Romulan boyfriend Narek enjoy some time together, although his role in the Empire means that he can't really disclose much personal information. It seems the Romulan-held Borg cube is the site of a scientific research exchange program with other races, mixed in with a splash of paranoia because the whole site is an artifact considered more dormant than actually dead. But as well as the technology harvest, some people like Soji are here to help recover the individuality of the surviving disconnected ex-Borg, under the close scrutiny, of course, of Romulan security. Back at the vineyard, Picard's doctor pops over for a visit following his medical scan to get back out into space. He's physically fit, but there's also bad news, confirming he does indeed have the onset of some form of dementia, but he won't let that stop him from getting into trouble back among the stars. So the retired admiral visits Starfleet, that's getting a little too young to remember old dogs like him, to meet with an old colleague and explain his concerns about part of Data's mind still existing somewhere. He would like a temporary reinstatement and a small ship, but Admiral Clancy watched him badmouth Starfleet in that TV interview and all but spits in his face regarding any sort of conspiracy. Then she reports her meeting to the Federation's Vulcan head of security, Commodore O, including his plans to locate Dr. Maddox. O takes a keen interest, but confirms that no illegal Romulan activity is taking place on Earth. But it actually turns out that the failed Romulan kidnap operation was executed with O's approval, led by Lieutenant Rizzo, who receives a dressing down for her failure to take Daj alive and gets sent off instead to personally oversee the other half of their operation. So Rizzo calls ahead to the Borg cube, where it's revealed she's actually an undercover Romulan and sister to Narek, who is observing Soji as part of a wider Zhat Vash plan that Commodore O, who's half Vulcan, half Romulan, has secretly set in motion, proving the deep and wide reach of the secret organization. Laris and Zaban strongly advise caution in anything regarding the Zhat Vash, citing Picard's ego as a problem. But he goes ahead anyway and visits an old colleague Raffi, who's living a little far away from that Federation Utopia vibe in a shack, and she's not pleased to see him. So, kind of hinting that she might be a former drug addict, Picard wins her over with a bottle of wine. You see, 14 years ago, she had the Admiral's back when he berated Starfleet for abandoning the Romulan relocation effort. They could have kept up a limited version of the evacuation using old mothballed ships and their reserve synthetic staff. But the fact that half of Starfleet's command didn't want to help the Romulans anyway, and the sudden synthetic prohibition in reaction to Mars, made it all impossible. So the Admiral's last move was to threaten his resignation, which he was gutted to find they accepted. But by association, Raffi also ended up getting fired, and she didn't land on her feet quite like Jean-Luc did. In fact, he'd never even bothered to check up on her over the last 14 years, until right now when he wants something, for which he apologizes. He needs a ship and a pilot so that he can go in search of Dr. Bruce Maddox, the likely creator of the twins using part of Data's network. She'll put him in touch with a pilot, but is done being his friend. Although Picard sends her the flight plans anyway, and so he visits Captain Rios aboard the La Sirena, who's a slightly bitter former Starfleet pilot, but it looks like he'll work, even if he does have a hologram copy of himself for every emergency roll on board the ship. And Dr. Jurati receives a visit from Commodore O, who's not there for a social. Another hit team attacks Picard back in his home, but with the high expertise of his Romulan friends, they fend off the assassins with close quarters combat and a number of emergency phasers kept handy for any trouble, with Dr. Jurati catching the last of them in a late save whilst on her way over to explain she was just visited by the head of Starfleet security. She wants to join Picard on his journey to see a perfect synthetic for herself, and as Earth's leading expert on the topic, she can probably earn her keep. So they beam on up, and Raffi has joined them, but only for a short ride, as Bruce Maddox is on Freecloud, which is her destination for her own reasons. And with the course set in, they engage. Meanwhile, on the cube, Soji is showing unique talent and empathy when it comes to the recuperation of the damaged Borg survivors. And the director of that project turns out to be Hugh, himself a former Borg that ended up leaving the collective during the good old days of TNG, although even his diplomatic authorization is begrudgingly accepted by the Romulans. Soji asked to help a specific survivor called Ramda, who was a former Romulan expert on myths before assimilation, in the hopes that understanding a shared cultural mythical framework can be used as an inroads towards recovery. And it's going well, right up until Ramda recognizes Soji from tomorrow, and the girl herself drops some other information that even Hugh wasn't aware of. Ramda was on board the last ever ship to be assimilated by the cube, and perhaps responsible for why the whole Matrix shut down. But she really isn't feeling Soji's vibe, asking after which sister she is, and calling her the Destroyer before attempting an early exit that they managed to stop. She's been getting the same fake phone calls from Mother that seem to send her into a sleep cycle, and Narek is curious as to how she also has a memory full of restricted information. His sister arrives in the flesh, and although he's employing subtle observation, she's more of an aggressive, blunt type that's waiting for him to slip up. On board the ship, Dr. Jurati is having a super fun conversation with Captain Rios about existential death, and Raffi is upset to find they're already taking a detour to the planet Vashti. Picard, who is chilling on the holodeck with another EMH program, explains he might be able to pick up a fighter along the way. You see, back in the day on the Romulan relocation hub, Admiral Picard was still giving hope to the displaced and befriending young orphans in a convent that practiced the way of absolute candor. He's learned to open up a lot more with children and familiarity, thanks in part to his days with Q. But all of his promises about Starfleet's help turned to dust following the report on the attack on Mars. Well, pulling the rug on the Romulans has reduced those relocation centers to dusty ghettos filled with resentment. This whole sector of space is half abandoned and under the threat of a pirate in a stolen TOS bird of prey. As an old man, Picard needs the strength of a young one, and so he asks a grown-up Elnor to join his quest, who's also feeling pretty abandoned and declines. So Picard intentionally ignores the anti-human sentiment in town and gets into a fight, all in order to manufacture a situation of conflict that forces the young Romulan to defend him, because he's a young warrior monk that's now been ideologically conditioned to only join lost causes, like an old man on his hopeless last mission. Then Picard has the gall to tell him off for murder, swearing him to fight only when Jean-Luc gives the go-ahead. But it's a bumpy exit thanks to that local pirate, and Rios, with some more holograms of himself, pull off some slick maneuvers, yet still get hammered, until they get a little breathing room thanks to a Ranger patrol ship joining the fight. They disable the pirates together thanks to some impressive flying from that Ranger, but with their craft breaking up, the pilot beams on board, who turns out to be 7 of 9, who is now owed a new ship. You see, it turns out since the Voyager days, she's been on a personal mission of hunting down black market scumbags who've been trading in illegal Borg implants. She was too late to help her old friend, but despite her rough attitude out here in the sticks, the two former Borg relate over still trying to do some good. Over at the cube, Soji is bummed her patient has taken a personal hatred towards her, and although he can't talk about his job, she's reasoned out that her boyfriend Narek is probably part of a Romulan secret service. But he gets her running around like a pair of young lovers, before spoiling the mood and questioning why most of her memories from 3 years ago aren't on any transport records. His sister and her personal boundary issues is still applying pressure for a pain and violence method, but if they press Soji too hard, they risk activating her defenses, and her inroads into the Borg survivors could be invaluable, as well as a step towards finding out where she came from so that they can destroy the source of the synthetics. Since the android ban, Bruce Maddox has been working in the legal grey zone of Free Cloud, and it turns out that he and Dr. Jurati used to be tight. This sector is like a big space Las Vegas meets Cyberpunk 2077, and Maddox has been detained by his former black market employer, the Jazzle, who is now willing to sell him over to the Romulan Tal Shiar. Her security is too tight, so the team go in undercover as other black market dealers. Lizardman can smell lies, but thanks to some fun drugs Raffi keeps on her, Rios is able to pass the test and get permission to beam down the rest of the team, who are all pretending to sell 7 of 9 in return for Maddox, and generally just hamming up the place. Meanwhile, this is as far as Raffi goes, with a friendly goodbye, as her secret destination has been to go visit her son. But it's a bit awkward, because he's learned to hate her during her post-Starfleet drug abuse days, and for all of those conspiracy theories regarding the attack on Mars. So hey, you've got a granddaughter on the way, but also goodbye, meaning she's back on board the ship. Despite looking like Deanna Troi, the Jazzle is not a very nice person, who revels in breaking trust and carving people up for parts. Turns out out her and Seven have some history, and she's been playing along with Picard's ruse just to get her hands on a little sweet revenge. But they can't all afford to have a bounty put on their heads, and manage to talk Seven down before grabbing Maddox and beaming out of there. So she gives Jean-Luc a calling card and is gonna rejoin the Rangers, grabbing a couple of phases for her trouble. But without implicating the rest of the team, she actually solos right back to the club to wash away some filth and do a little spring cleaning. Maddox is in poor condition, but confirms that Daj had a sister called Soji, and gives her location. He was the one who had given them the unconscious programming for Earth and the Borg artifact, so that they could investigate any connection between its shutdown and the synthetic attack on Mars. But when no one's looking, Dr. Jurati kills her former lover, Dr. Maddox, bypassing the ship's EMH, her secret mission for joining the crew this whole time, although it's clearly something she's not happy doing. It's hard for her, but she convinces the others he died from his injuries and seeks a little comfort from Rios for a little short-term bedroom therapy while they head for the abandoned Borg cube, which is still a difficult memory for Jean-Luc. The Romulans won't just allow anyone to visit their prized artifact, so they get Raffi to call up an old flame in Starfleet for a diplomatic pass to the Borg Reclamation Project, which works, despite her depressed drinking binge, although the permit is for Picard only, who beams in solo, annoying his young guardian, where he immediately has a big PTSD panic attack, despite kind of being through this already back in First Contact. But the reclaimed ex-Borg here are just making sure he doesn't fall, and Picard is glad to see a familiar face in Hugh. He's the director here, although the rest of the recovered ex-Borg are to remain on the former cube under Romulan supervision. Picard asks after Soji, and Hugh isn't surprised, considering her brilliance and all the attention she's been getting from that Romulan spy, whilst giving a tour of all the good work they've been doing. Soji has dreams of being a child in her father's genetics lab, which may or may not contain a grain of truth, and as ever Narek is on hand to listen to her secrets, which is keeping things halfway between a relationship and an interrogation, hoping to nudge her into being suspicious about her own identity and past. His sister suspects he's growing too attached with all of that pillow talk, but he explains those dreams are Soji's synthetic memories reconciling with her false human self-identity, dreams that could contain clues about her past and homeworld that she wouldn't even know she was giving up. His quality of patience again being something his sister never had, and thanks to another nudge from Narek, she realizes that all of her phone calls to her mum are in fact causing her to pass out, and so she scans all of her childhood memorabilia to discover it was all fabricated only 3 years ago, so suggesting that she might have implanted memories. He takes her to a Romulan meditation chamber to try some guided techniques to access the deepest parts of her mind, and under Narek's supervision, she is able to clarify her childhood dreams, resolving them into the closer reality of her doll form, and causing her to give up the location of her homeworld. And so having what the Jadvash need, he tells Soji she's not real, and seals her in with a radioactive gas bomb, before having a little cry. But her defenses activate, and she tears through the floor to escape, landing right on Picard, who explains he's here to help before they all make a move to get out of there. The men's former latent Borg memories help them escape into unexplored sections of the artifact, including the Queen Cell and its emergency quantum gateway, and Elnor beams down without permission in order to lend them a hand, remaining with Hugh to cover their retreat and re-hide the room so that no one can follow after Picard. And we get a flashback to that meeting Jurati had with Commodore O back on Earth, where it turns out she was given a non-consensual brain dump of apocalyptically grim intrusive thinking to make her play the spy as well as eating a urinal cake for tracking reasons. Meanwhile, Rizzo is now executing the recovered Borg patients to get Soji's location out of Hugh, who remains quiet at great cost. She really wants to kill him too, but as a Federation diplomat, he's off limits, with Elnor dropping out of hiding to remain by his side, so she just monitors them right up until Hugh declares open treason, legally entitling her to the kill. And in his defense, our young combat monk flexes his training across the Tau Shiar operatives with incredible skill, until Rizzo steps up with Vijat Vash approach of misdirection and murder, killing Hugh, who tells the kid they need an ex-Borg to work the Queen Cell. And in his flight from danger, he finds 7 of 9's calling beacon that Picard had dropped during his earlier panic attack. Meanwhile, the Romulans let the La Sirena go, seeing as Picard and Soji aren't on board. But it's really just so that Narek can pull a Boba Fett and follow after them in a Romulan spy ship. But Rios spots the tail and pulls a cheeky handbrake turn out of warp to follow a different route, although Dr. Jurati just wants to go back home instead. Raffi tries to console her because she's clearly having a hard time, yet with no idea why. eye, and their shadow locks back onto their trail thanks to the tracking device in her bloodstream. Then her guilt is further compounded when Rios suspects Raffi might be the one betraying their location, so she synthesizes a neurotoxic poison dose for herself that disables the tracker, but also slips her into a coma, while Picard had used the gateway to beam them over to a safe place on the planet of Nepenthe. Soji is having to suddenly reconcile her self-identity as a synthetic, but they have arrived at the home of Deanna Troi and Will Riker, all of them glad friends, even if it is because Picard needs a place to hide out, and it seems retirement for the couple has been a positive experience, with a home for them and their second child, Kestra, who has heard the stories of Commander Data and is fascinated to meet an android who's a little closer to her own age. Deanna and Riker lost their firstborn son, who died from a rare silicon virus that could have been cured with a synthetically made antibody. But the side effect of that synthetics ban meant no more could be made. It's a lovely break in a moment of paradise, but Picard knows they can't stay for long for fear of bringing trouble back into their friends' lives. Soji's experience of manipulation has given her some serious trust issues, but a weekend of empathy among some genuinely good people helps her to feel safe enough to share her recounted memories of her homeworld. It seems Dr. Maddox had spent his time there after the Federation ban, continuing his work on synthetic life before falling in with the wrong crowd at Freeport, and recuperated Picard and Soji being back to the ship. Except Rios is reacting very strangely to her presence, seeming to zone out, and Raffi, having realized Jurati was the source of that tracking beacon, is having some trust issues around new faces. Well, Jean-Luc calls Admiral Clancy again to point out that all of his little theories have turned out to be very real problems, and to her credit, she's going to be sending some Starfleet reinforcements over his way. So it turns out the secret organization of Zhat Vash hate artificial life so much because they found a storehouse of memories from a lost race that burns a warning into their minds. This secret admonition ceremony is no easy ride, however, and not all of them survive the experience of this new flavor. However, Ramda, who had just about survived it, was later assimilated by the Borg cube, and it's suspected that her artificially indoctrinated levels of anti-synthetic despair essentially poisoned the cube's hive mind like a bad meal, causing it to be cut off from the rest of the collective. Elnor is still on the run from the Romulans and almost caught, but 7 of 9 has responded to her calling card, and the young man is greatly relieved to find a friendly face. And she takes him back to the Queen Chamber, because now that the Romulans are openly up to no good, she's going to reactivate the entire cube, which begins healing immediately. But taking control is going to turn her into a temporary queen, even if it is just on the local area network, raising a minor moral issue regarding the re-enslavement of a recovered Borg. But times are desperate, and she synchronizes her consciousness with the entire cube. However, Rizzo is ruthlessly pragmatic and slaughters many of the Borg reclamation patients before having all of the other stored ones vented into outer space before they can become a problem. Yet, despite this, getting around the place is still becoming a bit too dangerous, and so she beams away and abandons the cube along with the rest of the Romulan fleet. Picard and Soji bond over stories of Data, and a recovering Jurati admits everything, including the poison poured into her mind, fighting the psychic block O had imposed on her from talking about it. The visions were from thousands of centuries ago, when the technological threshold of synthetic life brought hellish results, and now that threshold is reached again in the form of the Destroyer, or more specifically, Soji. Yet, despite the awkward situation, Dr. Jurati gets her wish of meeting a real live perfect synthetic, the pinnacle of what she had otherwise worked towards, and she overcomes her imposed fears for the reality of the girl that's standing before her, someone that she doesn't want to destroy. The reason why Rios suddenly wasn't vibing right is because back in his Starfleet days, he and his captain picked up a mission to meet 2 diplomats in a first contact scenario, but the captain shot them both in cold blood under a black flag directive straight from Starfleet security, under the threat of having his own entire ship and crew destroyed if he disobeyed. One of those diplomats being an exact copy of Soji, a directive from Commodore O to erase all common knowledge of the synthetics. So Raffi helps to pull everyone's different information together with a little interview time amongst all of the Rios holograms, and between them they realize that an ancient race artificially dragged 8 suns into a synchronized orbital system as a cosmic map marker for the location of their warning message about synthetic evolution drawing the attention of something very bad. And so in response to the advancements of Dr. Nooney and Sung's androids, the Zhat Vash sent their half-Romulan Vulcan mole, O, into Starfleet where she rose in the ranks and orchestrated the whole synthetic attack on Mars to force the Federation into an anti-synthetic response. A Romulan plan that came at the cost of resettling their own population. And thanks to Soji's time as a synthetic aboard the artifact, she's been subconsciously soaking in knowledge of the Borg transwarp conduits that will get them back to her home in no time. Transwarp travel can be a bumpy ride, but they arrive at Soji's homeworld Coppelius. Narek's skill as a spy has also allowed him to follow them through the transwarp network, and he's damaging their ship. But then 7 of 9's reactivated Borg cube also crashes the party before everyone involved gets their power drained by the organic planetary defense orchids, causing all 3 ships to plummet through the atmosphere. Picard loses consciousness, and during Jurati's scan, she discovers his brain abnormality in its progression, and so he informs the crew about his terminal prognosis to keep them all on the same page. However, they don't let it distract them from their current situation. Firstly, they head to the cube wreckage to see if their friends are still alive, and are glad to discover a few remaining ex-Borg, as well as Elnor and 7 of 9, lamenting the death of Hugh. Then they get the long-range scanners back up, but only to discover that a fleet of 218 Romulan warbirds will arrive at their location in 2 days. So they head over to Soji's home, which is a commune full of all of the other synthetic twins. They welcome the humans and show emotion, but the crew explain that although Soji completed her mission of uncovering the truth behind the Mars attacks, trouble is on the horizon. This place is run by Dr. Altan Inigo Soong, Noonion's son, and Sutra, the Soji-class synthetic twin of the diplomat that was killed by Starfleet, who welcomes them with some slightly off vibes, before suggesting a mind meld with Jurati in order to experience the warning message that was implanted in her. But her organic synthetic mind is able to process the Zhat Vash legacy message in a much clearer manner than the Romulan secret organization, because it turns out that the ancient beacon was not a warning message about synthetics meant for them, but a misinterpreted promise message designed for the emerging synthetics, confirming that a higher form of artificial life is out there, watching and waiting for a subspace beacon to come to the synthetics' aid and wipe out all advanced organic life that might be oppressing them. So she's talking about galactic genocide as an overkill defense method against the Romulan fleet, and loving it. But Picard suggests they just hop on board Rios's ship and simply escape the Romulans, as well as offering to champion for their rights. Narek is also captured and brought over, and Soji confirms, despite his claims of love, that she's just not into him anymore. But Sutra really likes that mass murder idea, and so she frees Narek and kills one of her own in order to scare everyone back over to her side. And further to this, Soji will stand with her own people, and even Dr. Jurati, who is expecting to be in prison by now, wants to help the synthetics and work on a mind transfer to put Soong into a robo-body of his own. So Picard's now in lockdown, and Narek makes it over to the Borg ship, slipping past Elnor and 7 to find his sister hadn't in fact beamed out to the fleet, but stayed on site and hidden during the crash. So he grabs a bunch of her bombs and claims he's off to blow up the few remaining defense orchids before their fleet arrives. But instead, he heads across to Rios and Raffi, who have fixed their ship, and explains that they all have a common robo-enemy that's going to be coming their way, wisely choosing not to die, but instead explain that these deep-rooted Romulan myths were actually based on a long-past synthetic reality. So they're pretending they've re-caught Narek for the synths in order to enter the commune with a plan to blow up their beacon. And even Soong, who has discovered that Sutra was behind the death of one of her own for the sake of revenge, is willing to help them undo his mistake. Meanwhile, at the cube, 7 of 9 discovers Rizzo, and the two ladies duke it out for a while before the former Borg gets even more payback for her people, this time for Hugh. And Jurati, who is only pretending to be okay with genocide, frees Picard and takes him back to the La Sirena, where the plan is to make the synthetics care about life and leading by example, flying into orbit to defend the commune from the Romulan fleet that is now openly led by General O, who has given up her Starfleet look and who is super keen to sterilize the planet. They start by killing off the orchid defenses, but thanks to some tech from the commune, Picard and Jurati project a bunch of shadow clones to keep the Romulans busy for a short time. He intends to sacrifice his life to convince Soji to stop building the beacon, because despite Soong turning off Sutra, Soji managed to foil the bombing operation and took over the construction herself. It's a valiant effort, but Picard is about to be blown out of the sky. That is, until Starfleet arrive with an equally inordinate amount of its own newest and toughest ships, flaunting an Admiral Riker back at the helm under a temporary recommission, and claiming the planet under Federation protection and not Romulan rule, thanks to Jean-Luc sending a diplomatic message long before the arrival of General O. Both fleets are prepared for a massive close-quarters fight, and Picard's brain condition is bringing him to a close, pleading with Soji to make the right choice. Starfleet has arrived in order to protect the synthetics, who in turn can choose to protect them. And just as the beacon begins to allow some seriously freaky outer-galactic robot shit to come through, Soji chooses to place her faith in him and destroys it, delaying the annihilation of all local life. And with the Zhat Vash apocalyptic fears no longer an immediate threat, General O loses her boner for a fight to the death against Riker and retreats the Romulan fleet. And so Picard says goodbye to his old friend, and the Federation fleet also leave the sector before he's beamed back to the commune at the end of his life. And so Jean-Luc Picard says farewell to his friends, who all join him in his last moments. Oh my god. He's dead. And yet, his consciousness has entered into a complex quantum reconstruction, a result of Data having its consciousness reconstructed in a quantum state by Soong and Maddox. In this space, the two old friends discuss the nature of their physical deaths, and how they don't regret their life actions, with Data recalling his time with Picard and his love as being a large part of his life. But this isn't the end for Jean-Luc, and he won't be joining Dumbledore on the train, because Data's construct is just a holding place for his consciousness. Soong and co have scanned a copy of his neural pathways into the synthetic golem, and it's ready for Picard's conscious experience to re-enter the physical world of the living and inhabit the new shell, which just happens to have been perfectly modelled after the last one, with no superpowers, that's also conveniently going to age just like he would have without the brain defect. Hooray! And so with one last personal request to take care of, he allows Data to truly die, even in the quantum simulation that's held his remaining consciousness, saying goodbye to an old friend forever. And with the truth uncovered, resulting in the Federation's retraction of the synthetic ban, Jean-Luc Picard's new crew, along with Soji, are free to explore the stars. So thanks a lot for watching, and I really hope you've enjoyed having Picard Season 1 crammed inside of you. These are full-on recaps that try to skip nothing instead of just a quickie, and take ages to make. So a great big thank you to any of you who've liked, commented, and subscribed. I'm a TNG boy at heart, so I'd love to hear your opinions on this show. I'll see you next time, and take care.